Hey everybody, this is Lauren Harpster from Bead and Blossom. Today I am continuing my French Beaded Clematis class by demonstrating how to make the leaves and the bud petals for our vines. We're going to be working with the same basic frame technique that I taught in the previous video where I demonstrated the petals, but we're going to be altering it to get a different shape. We need to make a rounded bottom on the bottom of our leaves, so I'm going to be teaching you a different wrapping angle. We're also going to be learning about top wire extension beads, which we add to the top wire between rows to make a longer and thinner point. To make the leaves, we'll be using the same basic frame technique that I demonstrated in the petal video, but we're going to be altering it with something that I call a top wire extension, which is basically just adding beads to that top wire between rows to make an elongated, thinner point. Alright, so I'm making the small leaf here, and the small leaf says that we have an 8 bead basic row, but we're going to be adding 2 top wire extension beads between some rows. And I like to just go ahead and add those now while I'm setting up the frame. But you can, if it's better for you, you can leave those off for now and then add them later between those rows. All right, so I'm going to leave somewhere around an inch, inch and a half above my basic row. And I'm going to bring that working wire over across it below the basic row. I'm going to make my bottom wire, this is about 2 or 3 inches long there. Pinch and hold and twist that bottom wire. Alright, straighten everything out by pulling in opposite directions. Alright, now I'm going to take my 2 top wire extension beads because I've already got them on. I'm going to take them to the top of my wire and then just bend them back and then kind of use gravity to help me keep them down here so they're not getting in the way of my rows up here. Now the small leaf has 7 rows total. That means we're going to go 3 times all the way around the basic row. We're going to have a round bottom though, which is a 90-degree angle wrap, which I'll show you once we get there. But we're going to use that same 45-degree angle wrap to make a pointed top. Alright, so row 2. We're going to take to the top wire. Our top wire extension beads are still at the top of our wire. And I'm going to measure out and wrap at that 45-degree angle that I showed you in the last video. And I'm going to take row 3 back down to the bottom wire. And this is where we need that new angle that I didn't show in the last video, which is the 90-degree angle wrap. So we're going to cross the wire over at a 90-degree angle with that bottom wire. Measure out your beads so they are on top of that bottom wire without going past it. And what I like to do is I like to use my thumb kind of as an anchor here as I'm wrapping around at that 90 degree. Keep that 90 degree the whole way. And that thumb anchor just helps me to keep my wrap really tight there around that frame wire. All right, now if you ever have where your beads are not quite sitting on top of that bottom wire down there, I do this little lift to make some space between my working wire and that frame wire, and then I push down on my beads and kind of wiggle it around a little bit to get those beads on top of that frame wire. All right, now row 4, we're going to wrap up to the top wire, but before we wrap row 4, our pattern says that we need 1 top wire extension bead after row 3, so that's right now, right before row 4. And we're going to move down one of those beads on the top wire. If you haven't added it already, you'll just undo your little loop and add the bead. And then I'm going to measure out at a 45-degree angle above that top wire extension bead. Pinch and hold that row in place, and then wrap at that 45-degree angle. And you'll see how that has created an extra pointy point. Sorry if you can hear my dog, she's going nuts upstairs. All right, row 5, we're going to take down the side again to the bottom wire. And again, we're going to cross over at that 90-degree angle. Measure out the beads so that they sit on top of that bottom wire so we can cover it as best as we can. And I'm going to use my thumb as an anchor and wrap 90 degrees all the way around back to the front of my frame wire. Now we've got 2 more rows of beads to add for our small leaf. And bring more beads down off of my spool. bring down my last top wire extension bead. Measure out my row carefully. And I'm going to measure at a 45-degree angle right above that last top wire extension bead. Pinch and hold that row in place. Sometimes I do use my thumb as a little bit of an anchor with my pointed tops as well. Helps get a little bit of a tighter wrap there. All right, last row of beads we're going to take to the bottom wire. And that one, okay, 90-degree angle wrap. And because it's the last row, we're going to wrap twice to finish off that working wire. And for the leaves, we are reducing to 2 bottom wires. So I'm going to remove that bottom wire entirely. Or that working wire entirely. And I should be left with just the 2 bottom wires in my loop. And I'm going to cut those on the side to open that up. And then I'm going to clip my top wire and fold it to the back of my leaf. All right, and there we have a finished small leaf. I forgot to mention here that I was working with color F, which is a transparent lime green rainbow bead. And for the small leaf, you need somewhere around 9 to 10 inches of beads for each leaf. All right, now let's talk about these other leaf sizes. I showed you the small leaf in the video demo, but we also have a medium leaf and a large leaf in the pattern. Now, for the medium leaf, it is a 9-row basic frame, 10 bead basic row, and with a round bottom, pointed top. You're going to add 1 bead to the top wire after rows 3, 5, and 7 for a total of 3 top wire extension beads. And then you will reduce to 2 bottom wires. Now with the large leaf, it is a 11-row basic frame, a 12 bead basic row, round bottom, pointed top. And then you're going to add 1 bead to the top wire after rows 3, 5, 7, and 9 for a total of 4 top wire extension beads. And you're going to reduce to 2 bottom wires. Now let's talk about how many to make. I made 10 of these small leaves in color F. There was 2 for each bud and each size of flower that you're making. Now the medium leaf is a little bit different because I made some of them in my lighter green and some of them in my darker green. I made 5 in the lighter green. There's going to be 1 for each bud, 1 for each large flower, and 1 for each small flower. And I made 6 of the medium leaf in the darker green, which I used a transparent green rainbow. There's 6 total in this darker color, 2 for each large flower and 2 for each small flower. The medium leaf, I made 3 total for my full arrangement. There's 1 for each large flower and 1 for each small flower. Now let's look at these bud petals. We're going to be working with the same basic technique that we used for the leaves. We've got a 7-row basic frame, 5 bead basic row with a round bottom and pointed top. We need to add 1 bead to the top wire after rows 3 and 5 for a total of 2 top wire extension beads. Now, when you're constructing your frame, make your top wire a little bit longer than you think you need, because we are not going to clip this off when we are done. We're simply going to open up that loop and leave it attached. This wire is very important in the assembly of our buds. Do not cut it off and fold it to the back of the petal, or you will need to remake your bud petals. We need this wire. Now, the bottom wire, we're actually going to reduce to 1 bottom wire. And that means that after I remove my working wire, I need to open up my bottom loop. If you have any twists there, untwist them up to the point where you tied off that working wire. And then we're going to very carefully clip one of these wires right below where we wrapped that working wire to cut it off. Cut it as close as you can to that so you don't have a little stub there. And then straighten it out. And you should end up with 1 longer wire below your bud. All right, so you'll need to make 6 of those, 3 for each of your buds. Okay, since I just talked about these top wires, I got to add a little note here. I see people all the time recommending that if you're struggling with a regular 45-degree angle wrap to make like a regular point, like we did for our petals, the top of our petals, to add that top bead to the top wire, and then it won't matter if you can do that 45-degree angle wrap because you can still get a point by adding that bead to the top wire. Now I'm going to say not to do that. with some notes here. Okay, so if this is going to be the only French beading project you ever make, and you're really having a hard time with those pointed tops, go ahead and add a bead to the top wire. But if you really want to master the art of French beading, if you want to master the basic frame, please do not use those top wire extensions for a regular 45-degree angle wrap. It becomes a little bit of a crutch and makes it harder for you to learn proper wrapping technique. So please spend the time, if you want to master the art of French beading, spend the time practicing those 45-degree angle wraps and get it right with the wraps without having to use these top wire beads as a crutch. Now the other part of this is that, in addition to it becoming a crutch, is that when you do need to use the top wire extension technique, like we did with these leaves, we're using it to elongate and thin out a point that's already there. So if you are using those beads to make a normal 45-degree angle wrap, then the top wire extension technique is one that you won't be able to use properly when you need to. So again, I'm going to recommend spend the time, work on those 45-degree angle wraps.